Tonight, we're stepping into a world that smells of rot and smoke, where shadows flicker across crumbling wooden beams, and the wind carries more than just the chill of dawn. Welcome. Dim the lights, settle into your pillow, and make sure you're wrapped up warm, because where we're headed, comfort is a long-forgotten luxury. We're about to drift into the harsh, unvarnished world of the Middle Ages, a time of plagues, punishment, and pottage. Before we dive too deep, take a moment to do something simple. Tap that like button if you're ready for this strange journey through time, and let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from? What time is it where you are? I hope it's late. I hope you're just tired enough for your defenses to be low, because the truth we're about to uncover might unsettle you. Just a little. You see, the stories we're often told of the medieval world are draped in velvet banners and gleaming armor. Gallant knights rescuing maidens, festive banquets in candlelit halls, towering castles echoing with laughter. But that's a myth, carefully stitched together by bards, books, and yes, a few ambitious screenwriters. The real Middle Ages? Well, let's just say they rarely made it into bedtime stories. Forget the Hollywood knights and fairy tale castles. The truth? You wouldn't survive a single day. But don't worry, we're not sending you there without a guide. I'll be right here whispering in your ear every step of the way. Congratulations, it's 1325. The year the Pope is John XXIII, the Mongol Empire is fraying, and in a small village tucked somewhere in the English countryside, you, yes you, have just opened your eyes. Your bed? A scratchy wool blanket, damp from the night's frost. The straw beneath your back stinks faintly of mildew and mouse droppings. There's a sharp coldness to the air, and a low, wet cough from the other side of the room tells you someone, maybe your brother, maybe your mother, didn't make it through the night without a struggle. Above you, the rafters sag under the weight of soot. A single chicken pecks lazily near your foot. You shift, and the floor groans beneath you. Not because it's old, though it is, but because it's alive. With lice, with fleas, with the tiny crawling companions of every peasant's life. There's no glass on the windows, of course, just oiled parchment, yellowed and brittle, fluttering in the morning breeze, and the smell, somewhere between stale bread, wet wool, and unwashed skin, clings to everything, even you, especially you. This is your new world, and we've only just begun. Your eyes open slowly, reluctantly, as the faint light of dawn pushes its way through the greasy animal skin covering the tiny window. It's freezing. Not the kind of cold where you pull the blanket a little tighter. No, this is bone deep. The kind of cold that seeps into your joints and makes you question your will to live before you've even sat up. Your bed? A lumpy sack of straw and fleas, smelling like it was dragged straight from a barn. And to be honest, it probably was. Somewhere in the night the straw flattened into little islands of damp discomfort, and the bugs, well, they're still here. A few are crawling lazily across your sleeve. You brush them off, too tired to even scream. There's no pillow, not even a rolled-up shirt. Just your arm, numb from the cold and the weight of the filthy wool blanket wrapped around you. No Egyptian cotton here, just a blanket that hasn't been washed since last winter, stiff with grime and spotted with something that might be dried blood or stew. Honestly, you don't want to know. You sit up. The ceiling above you is low and sagging with soot from years of indoor fires. It creaks ominously as wind pushes against the roof. Your breath turns to mist in the air. There's movement beside you. Your sister, your uncle, maybe a cousin? Or is that just someone from the village staying the night? It doesn't matter. Everyone sleeps here. Your family, a random cousin, and a goat are all waking up in this one-room disaster. And yes, the goat is staring at you. The floor is packed earth, cold and uneven. A chicken pecks at your toe as if it owns the place. It probably does. In one corner, your mother stirs near the fire pit, which has long gone cold. She mutters something under her breath and starts trying to relight it with damp wood and prayer. Your stomach growls, but you already know what's coming. A scoop of yesterday's pottage, thinned down and reheated if you're lucky. You glance over and see the pot already blackened with soot. Someone forgot to cover it last night. Again. A fly lazily buzzes over it, as if mocking you. And then it hits. The bell. The church bell clangs like a medieval drill sergeant. Time to move, or else. That sound means it's morning, and whether your body agrees or not, the day has begun. You rub your face with cold fingers, crusted with yesterday's sweat and ash. There's no mirror, no toothbrush, no running water. Just a wooden bucket in the corner with something floating in it. Let's not talk about that. Now, as the hut groans with the movement of life, you feel the first urgent call of the day, the kind you can't ignore. But there's no bathroom here, no porcelain, no privacy. Just a wooden door, a muddy path, and a freezing draft outside. Time to answer nature's call, medieval style. So nature's calling, and unfortunately she doesn't care that it's 1325 and your options are, well, medieval at best. You brace yourself, step over your snoring cousin, nudge the goat aside, and shuffle to the corner. There it is, your royal throne. No flush valve, no toilet paper. Just a bucket that Uncle Wolfstan already filled. Generously. The smell hits you before you even lift the lid. It's a pungent mix of human sorrow, spoiled pottage, and something no one can quite identify anymore. You stare into it for a second, rethinking every decision that led you here. But it's either this, or outside. You push open the door and step into the crisp, rank-smelling air of your muddy village lane. If you're feeling brave, you carry the bucket with you. Because here's the real morning routine. You shout, "Gardaloo," a fancy way of saying, "Watch out below," and toss the contents of the bucket into the street. Spoiler, no one moves fast enough. And yes, someone's shoe, or worse, someone's face, usually pays the price. Welcome to the medieval sewer system. The roads are your drain pipes, and your neighbors are your unlucky witnesses. Waste flows freely in the ditches, mingling with dead rats, rotten food, and whatever the local pigs leave behind. When it rains, the whole village turns into a soup of filth and regret. And now that the bucket's empty, time for you to, well, contribute. Maybe there's a public latrine down by the river, a fly-infested wooden shack with a plank over a pit. Or maybe you crouch behind the barn like everyone else and pray the chickens give you some privacy. They never do. Toilet paper? Oh, that's cute. Try a handful of straw. Or some leaves. Moss, if it's spring. A torn bit of cloth from a shirt that already has more holes than fabric. If you're feeling fancy, really fancy, maybe a worn rag soaked in cold water. But chances are you just stand up, wipe your hands on your tunic, and pretend it didn't happen. Think the nobility had it better? Well, kind of. In a castle, you might find a garderobe, a little stone chute that drops your business directly into the moat below. But don't get too excited. The smell rises right back up, the draft makes everything worse, and invading soldiers sometimes sneak into castles by climbing up those very same waste tunnels. Imagine defending your home with your pants around your ankles. Not ideal. You make your way back inside, stepping carefully to avoid everything. Your hands are filthy, your feet are colder, and your dignity is somewhere back near the goat. But hey, at least now you've survived your first medieval bathroom break. The worst is over, right? Wrong. Now it's time for breakfast. And spoiler again, it's not bacon and eggs. So you've emptied your bucket, offended every one of your senses, and now you're hungry? Brave soul. The good news, there's food. The bad news, it's pottage. Again. Breakfast is a gloopy, beige mess of grains, dried peas, and last week's dreams. It's been simmering in the same pot for days, maybe even weeks, with fresh ingredients thrown in when someone remembers or finds something edible. Sometimes a turnip, sometimes a bone, sometimes... You don't ask. It's hot, vaguely edible, and about as exciting as licking wet cardboard. You sit by the fire, which is more smoke than flame, and eye your bowl. It steams like it's angry at you. You take a bite. It sticks to your teeth, your tongue, your soul. But you chew. You always chew. Next up is bread, or what the locals call bread. It's a rock-hard, dense brick made from coarse rye flour mixed with whatever bulk filler is on hand. Acorns, bran, sometimes even sawdust. Real wheat bread is for the rich. Yours could double as a blunt weapon. You bang it on the table. It doesn't crack, but the table leg does. You gnaw off a corner and hope your teeth don't join the casualties. Still thirsty? Great. Just don't even think about reaching for a glass of water. That lovely village stream out back is where everyone dumps their waste, bathes once a month, and lets the animals drink. So instead, you lift a warm wooden cup of small ale, a weak, barely alcoholic beer that's been brewed just strong enough to kill bacteria, and just weak enough that drinking it at dawn doesn't send you spinning. No coffee, no orange juice, no milk unless the cow hasn't kicked over the bucket again. Just lukewarm beer at 6 a.m., paired with stew that resents your existence and a hunk of bread that dares you to chew. You think about meat, just for a second. A juicy roast, some bacon, maybe an egg or two. But no, meat is rare and expensive. If it's not a feast day, someone has to literally die. Pig, chicken, or deer, for meat to hit your bowl. And deer? Hunting the Lord's deer is illegal. Poachers get hanged. Spices? Those are worth more than your hut, your clothes, and probably your neighbor's goat combined. Fruit is seasonal, and half the time it's fermented before it reaches your mouth. Vegetables are boiled to death. The only seasoning is salt, if you're lucky, and the occasional ash from the fire. And so you finish your meal, your stomach vaguely satisfied, your taste buds emotionally devastated. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve, because napkins aren't a thing, and brace yourself for the next ordeal. Time to get dressed. Spoiler, it doesn't get better. You've survived breakfast. Barely. Now it's time to get dressed. Brace yourself, because medieval fashion isn't exactly about comfort or style. You reach for your clothes, or rather, your one set of clothes. That's right. Your wardrobe? One tunic, worn so long it's practically part of your skin. It's a shapeless sack of rough wool or homespun linen, now stiff with layers of old sweat, dried mud, and probably some stew from last Tuesday. Washing it? Let's not joke about luxuries. If you're lucky, you slept in something slightly different, and now get to slip into your day clothes. If not, well, same tunic, different daylight. The material is coarse enough to sand wood, and every movement feels like being massaged by thorns. As for underwear, it's flexible. Some folks wore loose linen shifts underneath. Others just went commando under their itchy tunic. Underwear's optional, but scratchy wool isn't. Enjoy the medieval breeze. Shoes? Let's call them foot coverings. Worn leather things tied with scraps, barely thick enough to keep out mud, and definitely not waterproof. Socks are for nobles and bishops. You, peasant extraordinaire, just hope today isn't the day you step on a nail. Again. Now let's talk about cleaning these fashionable fits. Laundry isn't just time-consuming, it's war. Washing means hauling river water and scrubbing with ashes. Good luck. Soap, as we know it today, doesn't exist. You rub the cloth with harsh lye or boiled herbs, and maybe beat it on rocks until it stops smelling like a sheep pen. Most people just don't bother. Clothes are hung near the fire to smoke out the worst of it. Or maybe the smoke just confuses the fleas. Speaking of fleas, they're your constant companions now. Along with lice and a few friendly bedbugs. You're scratching with a spoon while chatting with the priest. No one cares. It's normal. Everyone's itchy. You might see someone casually picking lice out of their hair at the market and popping it between their fingernails. You shrug. That's just Brenda. Rashes, scabs, weird blotches. Normal. Itchy spots behind the knees or around your collar. Permanent. Even nobles can't escape it. They just smell better while scratching. Maybe. And don't even think about changing outfits midday. Clothes are precious. You patch them until they die, then cut them into rags, then maybe use the rags to wipe your nose or your... Well, you get the idea. So, you're dressed now. Sort of. You itch, you stink a little, and your shoes feel like wet cardboard. But you're ready to face the day, assuming you don't catch fire from walking too close to the hearth in that flammable tunic. Now that you look the part, let's address the one thing that's definitely not fresh: your breath. Time for a medieval dental horror story. Now that you're dressed and scratching in all the right places, it's time to smile and greet the day. If you can still smile, that is. Because in the Middle Ages, your mouth is a battlefield, and your teeth, they're losing. Let's start with the basics. Toothbrushes? Nope. Toothpaste? Dream on. Dentists? Only if you count the town barber and his terrifying toolbox. Hygiene is a vague concept, and oral hygiene? Practically witchcraft. So, what's left inside your mouth? Your smile? More haunted crypt than Hollywood. Cavities are your new friends. Most people's teeth are brown, black, or simply missing. Enamel eroded by grain-based diets, gums inflamed by constant infections, and molars riddled with decay. But don't worry, there are some remedies. You might try chewing on twigs to scrape off the worst of the grime. Maybe a birch or hazel stick if you're fancy. Or rinse with vinegar or urine. Yes, urine was a real thing. Some brave souls even rubbed crushed herbs or ashes on their teeth. Some chew a stick, others gargle wine. Your teeth? They're on their own. Eventually, decay becomes pain. Deep, gnawing, skull-throbbing agony that keeps you up at night. And that's when you face the most dreaded figure in town, the barber surgeon. He's the same guy who cuts your hair, lets your blood, and yes, pulls your teeth. Got a toothache? The barber's got pliers and no anesthesia. Sweet dreams. No numbing gel, no clean tools. Just a grimy pair of iron tongs, a leather strap to bite, and two strong friends to hold you down. If the tooth doesn't come out cleanly, congratulations. Now you've got broken roots and a jaw infection. Hope you didn't need to eat this week. And if you think this is just a peasant problem, think again. Nobles suffer too. Sugar, when available, rots their teeth even faster. Some royals were known for having blackened stumps in their 30s, smiling like walking tombstones. Of course, no one brushes. So halitosis is the medieval handshake. You talk to someone, they wince. They talk to you, you gag. And if you're courting someone, good luck. Romance? Only if you've got land. Love letters don't mention breath because everyone already smells like an open grave. There's no floss, no mouthwash, no fillings. If you lose a tooth, it's gone. If you get an infection, it could spread to your brain and kill you. All from that bit of leftover bread stuck in your molar. So now that your mouth is aching and your gums are probably bleeding, what's next? The fun's just beginning. You've got a full day of brutal, back-breaking physical labor ahead. Let's go to work, medieval style. The sun hasn't even fully risen, and already your body aches. But there's no time to stretch, no warm-up, no easing into the day. You've got work to do, a lot of it, and none of it's for you. Your job? Don't die while slaving for a lord who doesn't know your name. You live on his land. He owns the soil under your feet, the grain you grow, and even, in some twisted way, your time on earth. In return for a scrap of earth to grow your own vegetables, you owe him labor. Days, weeks, seasons of it. There's no contract, no negotiation, just duty. And what does that duty look like? You're digging ditches until your spine looks like a question mark. You haul buckets of water from a distant stream, carry stones to repair walls you didn't break, and break frozen soil with a wooden plow that hasn't been sharpened since your grandfather used it. You sow seeds, weed fields, repair fences, and drive livestock, all by hand. There are no gloves, no machines, just your calloused hands, your aching back, and the knowledge that if you fall behind, someone else might take your place or your land. And forget about variety. The tasks may change with the seasons, but the pain stays the same. Plow in spring, harvest in autumn, freeze in winter, and sweat buckets in summer. No weekends, no coffee breaks, just sunrise to sunset, 6 days a week. Unless you count Sunday, when you're allowed to rest. Sort of. That is, unless your lord needs something urgently. or there's a feast to prepare, or someone's cow wandered off, or your roof collapsed again. Sunday's rest is more a rumor than a rule, and you're not alone in this. Kids start at 5 with a tiny rake. Dreams, surviving the flu. Childhood, as you know it, doesn't exist here. Children aren't learning to ride bikes or read books. They're learning to carry firewood and shoe chickens. Their toys are rocks. Their games are chores. And the women? They don't rest either. After grinding grain and baking bread before sunrise, they carry baskets, patch clothes, nurse babies, tend goats, and join in the fields. Some are pregnant while they work, and others return to labor the day after childbirth. This is not a chapter in a storybook. There are no knights riding past to rescue you. This is survival by sweat, a grinding, relentless cycle that starts before dawn and ends when you collapse. And just when you think things can't get worse, you look up and see clouds gathering on the horizon. Because even if you do everything right, even if you work until your fingers bleed, the weather still gets the final say. Let's talk about the sky, the ultimate boss in medieval life. The weather doesn't care about you. It doesn't care that you're tired, barefoot, or hungry. It doesn't care that your child has a fever or that you haven't been dry in days. It just happens, and you deal with it, or you don't. Winter turns your hut into a freezer. Frostbite? Just bad luck. There's no insulation, just a few logs clumsily stacked, maybe sealed with straw if you're lucky. The wind finds every crack. It whistles through the walls like it's got something personal against you. Your blanket? Still that same unwashed slab of wool, stiff with filth and barely enough to cover your knees. You sleep in all your clothes and still shiver. Your breath fogs the air inside your home. Your fingers go numb. Your toes hurt when you wake up, if they wake up with you at all. The fire is a joke. Wood is scarce and expensive. If you've got a few sticks to burn, you huddle around them like they're gold. Because they are. But don't even think about taking firewood from the wrong place. Need firewood? Steal the wrong stick, and it's execution time. Seriously, lords don't mess around. That tree on the edge of your field? It might not be yours, and poaching wood could get you a noose or a fine you'll never pay off. And when the snow finally melts and the earth softens, don't celebrate yet. Summer's a sweaty oven. No deodorant, just flies and sunburn. The sun beats down like it's angry. The same tunic you wore all winter is now soaked with sweat, clinging to your skin like hot burlap. No breathable fabrics, no cotton blends. Just coarse wool, sticky linen, and the persistent itch of fleas. You work all day under the sun, hauling and digging with no hat, no shade, no break. Your skin burns, your lips crack. Your sweat mixes with dust until it cakes onto your face like clay. And the flies. So many flies. They follow you, land on your food, your face, and your sores. You try to swat them away with dirty hands, but they always come back. Your tunic's either frozen or soaked in sweat. Comfort's a myth. Rain doesn't help. It soaks everything. Your roof, your clothes, your mood. Once wet, your tunic won't dry for days. And if it's damp while you sleep, you just deal with it. Mold? Skin rashes? Too bad. Everyone stinks. Everyone's itchy. It's just part of life. So you adapt, not by changing your environment, but by lowering your standards. You learn to live with discomfort. You accept that nature is in charge, and it doesn't negotiate. You just hope it doesn't hit you too hard this year. But even if you survive the cold, the heat, and the rain, there's one thing you can't avoid. You still have to drink water. And in medieval life, that just might kill you. You're thirsty. You've just spent hours hauling dung, fighting off flies and sweating through your only tunic. What you need is a cool, refreshing drink. That clear stream? Someone's chamber pot beat you to it. Welcome to medieval hydration. That lovely little brook near your village? It's not a magical mountain spring. It's where people dump waste, wash dirty clothes, and maybe even a body or two. If it runs through town, assume it's flowing with more than just water. Pig guts, rotting food, and human filth are all part of the mix. Clean water is more dream than reality. So what do you drink? Beer. Kids drink beer too. Not for fun, but to avoid parasites. Not the hoppy kind you might find at a pub today. This stuff is weak, barely fermented, more like bread juice, but it's safer than the plague cocktail running through your local stream. Children chug it, monks brew it, and peasants gulp it before heading to the fields. If you're lucky, you might even get a hint of barley. If not, it still beats dysentery. Water was so dangerous, even bathing was considered a threat. Bathing? It opens your pores to plague. Filth is your armor. Yes, people believed that being too clean made you vulnerable. Clean pores were seen as open doors to disease. The filth you wore? That was protection. A nice, crusty layer of sweat and grime kept the bad air out. Some folks washed once a year. Others skipped it entirely unless marriage or death demanded a scrubbing. And for the brave soul who did attempt a bath, oh, you better commit. Want a bath? Haul water, boil it, and pray no one else uses the tub first. First, drag buckets of water from the well or river. Then light a fire, wait hours to get it warm, and pour it into a leaky wooden tub. Maybe your neighbors used it before you. Maybe they're using it after. There's no such thing as fresh, hot water for every person. You get one bathwater stew for the whole household, and by the time it's your turn, it's more human broth than hygiene ritual. You might think the church, the nobles, someone would have better standards. Not really. Some monasteries kept bathhouses, but even these fell out of favor when people began associating water with sin, temptation, and disease. Even royalty bathed rarely. Perfume did the heavy lifting. In short, water in the Middle Ages was something to fear, not cherish. Drinking it might kill you, bathing in it might curse you, and trusting it meant you probably didn't last long. But don't worry. If you do get sick from it, there's help. Next stop, the terrifying world of medieval medicine. Spoiler, leeches are the least of your problems. Feeling unwell? Maybe a fever, sore throat, or a mysterious rash creeping up your legs? Don't worry. Your local doctor has a foolproof plan. Blame it on your fluids. Cough? Rash? Broken bone? Your humors are out of whack. Welcome to medieval medicine, where science takes a long nap and superstition runs the hospital. Everything about your body is controlled by 4 mysterious humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. If you're sick, it's because one of them is having a tantrum. The cure? Rebalance the humors, whatever that means. And that's where things get bloody. Literally. Need a cure? Let the barber drain your blood with a rusty knife. Yes, the guy who cuts your hair also slices your veins. Why? Because bloodletting is the universal answer. Feeling weak? Clearly, you have too much blood. A few leeches or a generous slash of the arm should do the trick. No antiseptics, no gloves. Just hope he doesn't sneeze while holding the blade. And yes, infections are common, but hey, that's just more bad humors leaving the body, right? Did we mention there's no anesthesia? Because there's no anesthesia. No antibiotics, just beetle paste and prayers. Good luck. Surgery? It's done wide awake with biting sticks and screaming as the main tools of comfort. Got a wound? They might pack it with moldy bread, dried herbs, or, if things get creative, crushed beetles. Sometimes they pour boiling oil into cuts to seal them. Why? No one really knows, but it looks decisive. You'll probably pass out before they finish. Infections aren't a risk, they're a guarantee. That minor cut on your foot? It could turn black, swell like a poisoned melon, and kill you in a few days. A bad tooth can kill you. Welcome to medieval roulette. Toothache? You'll beg for death before it ends. Without dentists, the barber surgeon is once again your only hope. He'll yank the tooth with pliers and no warning, unless he's too busy draining someone else's blood. If the gum gets infected, sepsis might take you down faster than a battlefield wound. Let's not forget the plague. No one knows where it comes from, but they'll happily blame it on your sins, the stars, or bad air. The cure? Wear a dead toad around your neck or walk through smoke. If that doesn't work, there's always quarantine, medieval style, getting locked in a house with your entire infected family. Somehow, people survived. Maybe it was luck. Maybe it was the beer. But one thing's for sure. Getting sick was like spinning a very sharp, very dirty wheel of fortune. Now, if you've made it through the day without dying of fever or bleeding out from a stubbed toe, congratulations. It's time for dinner, if you're brave enough to eat it. You've worked yourself half to death, dodged infected water, survived your barber's latest treatment, and now, finally, it's dinner time. Except in the Middle Ages, hunger doesn't mean hope. It means gambling with your guts. Dinner's meat, if the rats didn't get to it first. Meat is rare. When it appears, it's probably been hanging in the smokehouse for days, crawling with flies, or already halfway spoiled. Smell something off? That's not seasoning, it's rot. And refrigeration? Only if you live on a glacier. Most of the time, people just add more salt and hope for the best. Bread, a supposed staple, isn't much safer. Flour is often bulked up with powdered clay, tree bark, or whatever's lying around. In damp seasons, rye bread might grow ergot, a lovely fungus that causes hallucinations, convulsions, and the occasional trip to the village graveyard. Your bread might make you hallucinate or just break your teeth. There's no yeast as we know it. Bread can be dense as a brick and tough enough to chip molars. And don't even think about butter. Dairy goes sour fast, and milk's usually reserved for the animals that aren't already sick. As for vegetables, it's turnips. Always turnips. Turnips again, seasoned with onions and a sprinkle of misery. No tomatoes. No potatoes. No chili flakes or herbes de Provence. Just boiled, bland root vegetables dumped into the same pottage you had for breakfast. And possibly lunch. The pot hasn't been properly cleaned in months, which is somehow a good thing. Flavor builds up that way. Probably. Craving meat? Well, if you're not a lord or a priest, you're mostly out of luck, unless you break the law. Caught a rabbit? Hope you like hanging for your dinner. Poaching is a capital crime. That deer grazing a few yards from your hovel legally belongs to the nobility. Kill it, and you might lose a hand, or your life. But starvation makes people reckless. Many risk it anyway, knowing full well the local sheriff would love a public execution to make an example. Even the mead or ale you drink with dinner is weak, flat, and sometimes sour, but it's better than water, so bottoms up. You eat crouched on a dirt floor, sometimes sharing a trench bowl with half your family and all their germs. If someone sneezes into the pottage, just stir it in and move on. It's not the worst thing you'll ingest tonight. So you chew slowly, eye the bread with suspicion, and pray whatever you swallowed won't kill you by morning. Dinner isn't just a meal, it's a test of endurance, luck, and digestive strength. And as the cold sets in and your stomach churns, one thing is certain: salvation isn't coming from the kitchen. It's probably coming from the church, and it wants confession. Next stop, the inescapable grip of medieval religion. In the Middle Ages, you don't just believe in religion, you're wrapped in it like a scratchy wool blanket you can't take off. Every hour of your day, from the moment the sun rises to the last candle flickers out, is choreographed by the church. The church isn't just religion, it's your landlord, judge, and calendar. Morning starts with bells from the village church tower, not to mark the time, but to tell you when to pray. Matins, lauds, vespers. If you can't name them, you'd better fake it. The church owns land, demands labor, and decides when you can eat, drink, work, rest, or even get married. Heaven help you if you get the calendar wrong and work on a holy day. Fear, not faith, is the church's finest tool. Priests describe hell with all the flair of horror authors. Rivers of fire, gnashing teeth, devils sharpening their pitchforks in eager anticipation. Sin isn't vague. It's lurking in every act you commit or fail to commit. Miss Mass? Enjoy eternal rivers of fire and demon pitchforks. Everyone, from the poorest beggar to the wealthiest baron, must pay tithes, a tenth of all income, crops, or livestock. You may be starving, but that last chicken? The church gets it. And forget reading the Bible for yourself. It's in Latin, and you're illiterate. You rely entirely on what the priest says, true or not. You owe a tenth of everything. Can't read the Bible? Tough luck. If you have questions, real questions, keep them to yourself. Doubt isn't curiosity, it's heresy. Accused heretics are tortured, exiled, or burned at the stake in the town square, while the rest of the village watches in horrified silence. Doubt the priest. Congrats, you're a heretic. Prepare to burn. The church's grip is total. Birth? Baptized by a priest. Marriage? Church sanctioned, or it doesn't count. Death? A priest buries you, or refuses to if you stepped out of line. Every life milestone passes through church hands, wrapped in incense and fear. Religious holidays aren't optional days off. They're reminders that you're being watched by neighbors, priests, and supposedly the divine. Failing to observe a saint's day properly might not send you to hell, but it will earn you public scorn and spiritual anxiety. And in a world where life is short, painful, and random, salvation isn't a gentle comfort, it's the only promise you've got. Heaven dangles in front of you like a carrot on a stick, while hell breathes down your neck, whispering about eternal consequences. But for many, one's place in the church wasn't just about the soul, it was also about the body. And no body was more scrutinized, judged, and controlled than that of a medieval woman. Next, the unique suffering of women in the Middle Ages. In the medieval world, being born female wasn't a twist of fate, it was a life sentence. From the moment a girl took her first breath, her path was carved in stone. Obey, serve, bear children, and be grateful no one accused her of witchcraft. Yet, born a girl, your future's marriage at 12, kids by 14, and no complaints. There were no dreams of education, ambition, or independence. A girl's value was in her dowry and her womb. By the time most boys were learning to swing a scythe, girls were being married off, often to older men they barely knew, and preparing to run a household before they were old enough to run anywhere alone. And then came childbirth. No sterile hospitals, no anesthesia, no trained doctors. Just the hope that the midwife remembered her prayers and the right herbs. Even a straightforward birth could turn fatal within minutes. Bleeding, infection, fever. Some women didn't survive their first delivery. Many didn't survive their fifth. Childbirth's a gamble. No doctors, just prayers and a midwife's best guess. Those who didn't marry weren't spared. Unwed women were seen as strange at best, dangerous at worst. A widow with land? Suspicious. A woman who healed with herbs? Obviously a witch. Speak too loudly, act too boldly, or live too independently, and you risked being denounced, dragged before the village, and punished. Or worse. Speak up? You're a witch. No herbs? Definitely a witch. And in between fear and labor, there was more labor. Women weren't just responsible for the children and the home. They worked the fields, hauled water, baked bread, spun cloth, and mended clothes. They managed the lice, soothed the sick, and patched up the injured. There was no time off, no reprieve, no recognition. You're not just a farmer, you're a cook, cleaner, and lice manager. They did it all, day after day, without thanks or relief. The church told them to be silent. The law told them they belonged to their husbands. And if anything went wrong in the village, crops failed, cows stopped giving milk, someone fell ill, guess who was blamed first? There were exceptions, of course. A few noble women with power, a handful of nuns with books. But for the overwhelming majority, womanhood was a relentless cycle of servitude, pain, and peril. And just when you think it can't get worse, remember, this world wasn't only unfair, it was violent. Because whether you were a woman, a man, or a child, the next threat was always just around the corner. Next, violence as a daily companion in medieval society. In the medieval world, violence wasn't a surprise. It was your morning alarm, your neighborhood entertainment, your government policy, and your daily reminder that life was nasty, brutish, and short. Violence isn't a glitch in the Middle Ages, it's the system. From drunken brawls in the tavern to brutal public executions in the village square, violence was everywhere, and no one, man, woman, child, was safe from it. Disputes were rarely settled with words and almost never with fairness. A stolen loaf of bread? Off with your hand. A bit of gossip? Strap on the scold's bridle. A metal cage clamped over your head and tongue, worn until your talking problem was solved. Steal bread? Lose a hand? Gossip? Wear a metal mask. And if the law didn't get you, superstition might. The concept of trial by jury often meant a trial by fire, or water, or whatever form of pain your accusers thought appropriate. To prove you weren't a witch, you might be ordered to retrieve a stone from a pot of boiling water. If your skin healed cleanly, you were innocent. If not, well, too bad. The logic was circular, the suffering guaranteed. Prove you're not a witch? Grab a stone from boiling water. Heal, or you're guilty. But it wasn't just about punishment. Violence was a form of entertainment and spectacle. Executions were public events, complete with jeering crowds, street food, and children on shoulders for a better view. Hanging, beheading, burning, drawing, and quartering. These weren't rare. They were ritual. The people watched not because they were evil, but because they were used to it. That's what fear and control looked like. Then there were the constant threats from the outside. Bandits on the road, rival clans in the next village, invading armies from over the hill. A noble's personal grudge could become your town's downfall. Castles burned, homes looted, entire villages wiped out over who insulted whose father 3 decades ago. Look at a noble's horse wrong, enjoy a fist to the face. And for women, violence took even darker turns. Assaults that weren't considered crimes unless a man's property, i.e. his wife or daughter, was affected. There was no recourse, no justice. You endured, or you vanished. It was a time where everyone was armed with something, a blade, a staff, a sharp tongue, where grudges festered into feuds, and blood in the streets was as common as mud. Even the church wasn't above it, wielding religious violence with a smile and a cross. In the Middle Ages, violence wasn't just a threat. It was a language. It was law. And in a world so unstable, one truth remained unshakable. No matter your rank or righteousness, death was never far away. Next, the inevitable, early, and often gruesome end to a medieval life. Death, in the Middle Ages, wasn't a far-off idea. It was a daily companion. You didn't ponder mortality over tea in your twilight years. You lived with it from the moment you opened your eyes, if you were lucky enough to open them at all. Live past 40? You're a legend. Most kids don't make it to 5. Infant mortality was heartbreakingly common. Many mothers didn't name their babies until they survived a few winters. A minor fever, a teething infection, or contaminated milk could carry off a child before the family ever had time to hope. And if you made it to adulthood, life didn't get easier. You were still dodging disease, famine, farm accidents, and poorly aimed axes from drunken neighbors. Plague, bad grain, or a drunken neighbor's axe, death's always near. There were no antibiotics, no trauma centers, no emergency numbers to call. A deep cut from fieldwork might turn septic. A poorly cooked meal might carry ergot or parasites. And then, of course, there was the Black Death, the disease that swept through entire villages like a scythe. Some people were buried in their clothes. Some weren't buried at all. Funerals were quick and often anonymous. Bodies were wrapped in cloth, dumped into shallow graves and covered with dirt, sometimes 2 or 3 to a hole. Time was short, and death moved fast. Priests said what prayers they could, but mass graves didn't allow much room for ceremony. No coffins, just a hole in a prayer, if there's room in the churchyard. And yet, through it all, people lived. They sang during harvest. They carved little jokes into the margins of their holy books. They married, danced, told stories by firelight, and whispered gossip in the rain. Life was short, yes, but it was theirs, and the will to live, to laugh, to find sweetness in a bitter world that was stronger than any plague. Somehow they laughed, sang, and loved. Humans are stubborn like that. It's easy to look back in horror, but those people didn't have the luxury of horror. They just had today. They survived without knowing why. They endured because it was the only choice, and in that, there is something deeply human and deeply moving. So the next time you grumble about your internet speed or a lukewarm latte, remember, you're not hauling your own bathwater. You're not chewing on bark for a toothache. You're not burying your fifth child in a field behind the church. You're living in the future. But before we celebrate our escape from that grim chapter of history, let's fast forward to another time, one still riddled with power, ambition, and drama. Next stop, the glittering, scheming, scandalous court of Catherine the Great. So now that we've crawled through the muck of the Middle Ages, let's take a breath and debunk a few myths while we're at it. Forget the fairy tales. The real medieval world wasn't a tapestry of noble quests and candlelit banquets. No knights, no feasts, just fleas, filth, and survival. The truth is sobering. Most people never saw a castle, never wore silk, and never heard the word chivalry, unless it was shouted by someone wielding a stick. They were too busy surviving plagues, praying the weather held, and trying not to die from their dinner. Sure, medieval life had moments of beauty, community feasts, religious festivals, music, but it was mostly a grind, a raw, relentless test of endurance. That said, if you're watching this from a room with solid walls, flushable toilets, drinkable water, and access to painkillers, congratulations. You're living a life that would have seemed like paradise to your ancestors. Tonight, hug your clean bed and thank your ancestors for enduring. Because they did endure. Through frostbite and famine, through superstition and scarlet fever, through mud and misery, they made it. And that long, painful crawl through history eventually gave rise to better things, to progress, to light, and to people like Catherine. Let's rewind the clock again, not quite as far this time. We're leaving the muddy pastures of medieval peasants behind and stepping into the powdered wigs, grand palaces, and political chess games of 18th century Europe. This isn't just a new chapter, it's a whole new world. Enter a girl named Sophie. Now let's meet Sophie, a girl with no crown but a hunger for greatness. Born in 1729, in a dusty, snow-drifted patch of northern Germany called Pomerania, Sophie didn't look like the stuff of legend. Her family was minor nobility, noble enough to avoid plowing fields, but not important enough for anyone to remember them. She grew up in drafty rooms with more ambition than money, more pressure than protection. Born in a forgotten corner of Pomerania, Sophie was no one, until she wasn't. Because this young girl with sharp eyes and sharper instincts would soon begin a journey that led to the Russian throne. Through political maneuvering, cultural reinvention, and sheer force of will, she would transform herself into one of the most powerful women in history, Catherine the Great. But before the crown, before the empire, before the legends, there was just a girl. Curious, determined, and very much aware that she was meant for more. So say goodbye to mud huts and plague boils. We're off to the glittering, dangerous world of imperial ambition. Next, Catherine's childhood, and the first steps on the path to power. Before she was Catherine the Great, she was just Sophie, a clever, observant girl growing up in a cold corner of Germany where dreams rarely reached beyond the church bell tower. Her world was one of discipline and restraint, stiff dinners, silent halls, and the constant hush of expectation. Yet within those confines, something quietly burned. Sophie's world was small, but her mind was vast, devouring books and languages. Born in 1729 in the town of Stettin, now Szczecin, Poland, Sophie had blue blood, but only just. Her family belonged to the minor nobility, prestigious enough to be invited to court, but never important enough to stay long. The household was devoutly Lutheran, modestly furnished, and governed with a mix of cold ambition and rigid discipline. At its center stood her mother, Johanna. Sophisticated, calculating, and obsessed with elevating the family's status, Johanna saw Sophie less as a daughter and more as a pawn. Her mother schemed for power, her father taught her discipline. Christian August, Sophie's father, was a stern and pious man, more interested in military order than fatherly warmth. Between Johanna's plotting and Christian's rigidity, Sophie was left to educate herself, and she did. Fluent in French by age 7, Sophie read anything she could find: philosophy, politics, theology. She didn't just study to impress, she studied to understand the game she was being pushed into. She learned to read faces, gauge tension in a room, and speak only when she had something worth saying. At 10, she learned to watch a room before speaking, a queen in training. She was charming when needed, quiet when it served her, and always listening. Her intelligence wasn't loud, it was patient, strategic, and in a world where women were rarely given agency, Sophie quietly built her own. Then, at 14, came the moment that changed her life forever. A letter arrived, not for her, but about her. Empress Elizabeth of Russia was seeking a bride for her nephew and heir, the Grand Duke Peter. The Russian court wanted a noble girl of suitable rank, Protestant roots, convertible to orthodoxy, and pliable ambition. Johanna pushed Sophie's name forward, and miraculously, it stuck. At 14, a letter from Russia changed everything. Sophie was summoned. The journey from Pomerania to the Russian court wasn't just a physical one, it was the beginning of her transformation. Sophie, who had never known comfort or approval at home, was about to enter one of the most opulent and dangerous courts in Europe, and she would not go quietly. She packed more than dresses. She packed intention. She would not just marry into power. She would become it. Next, Sophie arrives in Russia and becomes Catherine. In 1744, a teenage girl stepped off a carriage into a world she had only read about, icy, foreign, and immense. The air bit through her thin German dresses, and the palaces loomed like frozen giants. This was St. Petersburg, heart of the Russian Empire. And Sophie, the minor princess from a forgotten duchy, had just arrived in a place that would try to consume her. In thin German dresses, Sophie stepped into a frozen empire. She was there not for pleasure or power, not yet, but to marry Grand Duke Peter, the heir to Empress Elizabeth. A future empress in waiting, perhaps, but for now, she was just a foreign girl under scrutiny. Every step she took, every word she spoke, was judged, and the first demand came swiftly: conversion. To marry Peter, she had to become Russian, spiritually, politically, and entirely. That meant abandoning Lutheranism and embracing the rituals of Russian Orthodoxy. It meant leaving Sophie behind. She shed Sophie and Lutheranism, becoming Ekaterina, Russia's new pawn. Her new name was Yekaterina Alexeyevna, but even as they rebranded her, she did something no one expected. She meant it. Catherine didn't just fake devotion. She memorized Orthodox prayers, studied Russian history, and forced her German tongue to wrap itself around Slavic syllables. She memorized prayers and history, determined to belong. Where others might have flinched or fled, Catherine leaned in. She knew this was not a land for the faint-hearted. The Russian court was a theater of ambition, where nobles whispered behind fans, servants carried secrets in candlelight, and one misstep could mean exile or worse. But the Russian court wasn't a home, it was a battlefield. And her first opponent? Her future husband. Grand Duke Peter was awkward, immature, and openly obsessed with Prussia, Russia's enemy. Where Catherine studied, Peter sulked. Where she adapted, he resisted. They were mismatched in every way, yet she smiled, curtsied, and played the obedient bride-to-be. Behind the mask, Catherine was calculating. She knew the empire did not love weak rulers, and Peter, she saw clearly, was weak. If she were to survive this marriage and this court, she would need allies, knowledge, and time. This was no fairy tale courtship. It was her first test in a long game of power, and she intended to win. Next, Catherine's marriage begins, and so do the betrayals. The wedding bells rang, but there was no romance in the air. Catherine had married Grand Duke Peter, and with that, stepped fully into the jaws of the Russian court. Any dreams of partnership or affection were quickly dashed. Peter played with toy soldiers while Catherine studied Russia. Her husband, now heir to the throne, remained a boy in a man's role, petulant, erratic, and dangerously obsessed with Prussia, the very nation Russia had just warred against. He paraded around in Prussian uniforms, worshipped Frederick the Great, and mocked Russian customs, priests, even Catherine herself. Catherine, on the other hand, watched, learned, and adapted. Her heart hardened as the marriage soured, but her mind sharpened. She realized she couldn't rely on Peter for anything. Not love, not leadership, not safety. So, she stopped trying. The court, meanwhile, was no haven. It was a maze of whispering corridors and flickering candlelight, where rumors moved faster than carriages, and loyalty was always for sale. Catherine's every word was monitored. Her servants reported on her. Friends disappeared without reason. Her letters were read, her friends watched. She trusted no one. But even in this snake pit, she carved out her own hidden sanctum. At night, by candlelight, she studied forbidden texts, Rousseau, Montesquieu, and Voltaire. While Peter played at being a soldier, she studied what it meant to rule. By candlelight, she read Voltaire, dreaming of a modern Russia. She began building a quiet network. Officers respected her calm and intelligence. Scholars noticed her curiosity. Discontented nobles saw in her something Peter would never be: stable, wise, and genuinely Russian in spirit. She charmed generals and scholars, building power in the shadows. She smiled at the right people, kept her enemies guessing, and never showed fear. Inside she seethed, but outwardly, she was the perfect duchess. When Peter inherited the throne in 1762, she knew time was running out. His erratic behavior turned even his allies against him. So Catherine acted. She wasn't just planning for survival anymore, she was planning for power. Next, the coup. Catherine risks everything to seize the Russian throne. By 1762, Peter III had managed to alienate almost everyone who mattered. He insulted the Russian Orthodox Church, stripped nobles of privileges, and worshipped Frederick the Great like a fangirl at a Prussian cosplay convention. Peter mocked Russia, praised Prussia, and lost everyone's loyalty. Officers grumbled, priests scowled, courtiers whispered. Catherine, ever the quiet observer, knew the time had come. She wasn't just the Grand Duchess anymore. She was the only viable leader in a country losing patience with its erratic czar. Peter, oblivious, was off playing dress-up at a summer palace when it all began. At dawn on July 9th, Catherine made her move. She donned a green military uniform and rode to the Ismailovsky Regiment barracks. Her presence electrified the soldiers. Within hours, the army had declared its loyalty. The Senate, the clergy, and the capital followed. While Peter partied, Catherine rode through St. Petersburg crowned empress. It was almost too smooth. Peter panicked, begged for terms, then surrendered. A few days later, he was sick, then dead. Officially, colic. Unofficially, strangled while in captivity. No witnesses, no investigation. Peter was gone, officially colic, unofficially a knife in the dark. No one mourned. Russia exhaled. And Catherine, the German outsider with no royal blood and no legal right, stood alone atop a throne built by force and finesse. A German girl took Russia's throne by sheer will and wit. It was unprecedented. A woman, a foreigner, a usurper. And yet, the empire accepted her, not because of tradition, but because she had what Peter lacked: vision, intelligence, and the courage to lead. But seizing power was only the beginning. Next, now that she had the crown, Catherine had to prove she deserved it. Catherine may have seized the throne with military muscle, but she wanted to rule with intellect. Behind palace walls, she immersed herself in Enlightenment philosophy. Voltaire, Montesquieu, Diderot. She didn't just read them, she wrote to them. She wrote to Voltaire, dreaming of a Russia built on reason. To the world, Catherine styled herself as the philosopher queen. In 1767, she summoned a massive legislative commission of over 500 delegates, nobles, townspeople, Cossacks, even some non-Russians, to draft a new law code. Her instruction manual, the nakaz, was a shockwave of modern thought. Her nakaz was radical. No torture. Rulers serving the people. She quoted Beccaria and Montesquieu. She denounced capital punishment. She called for legal equality, on paper, at least. European intellectuals were dazzled. Voltaire cheered from Paris. But in Russia? The nobles smiled politely and did nothing. Catherine learned fast. Ideas could inspire, but they couldn't rule an empire of peasants and aristocrats who feared change. So she compromised. Publicly progressive, privately pragmatic. She expanded elementary education, opened libraries, and encouraged inoculation against smallpox, setting the example by getting jabbed herself. But she didn't touch serfdom, the backbone of noble power. She built schools but kept serfs to appease the nobles. Behind her gilded image was a master tactician. She needed noble support, especially after claiming the throne in a coup. Reforms had to serve her survival, not just her ideals. A philosopher queen in public, a cunning empress in private. Still, Catherine's Russia looked increasingly modern, on the surface at least. Enlightenment ideas flowed into the empire, not through revolution, but through salons, statutes, and stage plays. It was progress, Russian style, slow, selective, and always under her control. But her ambition didn't stop at ideas. Catherine's next chapter wasn't written in ink, it was carved in land. Next, the Empress expands her empire, piece by piece. Catherine wasn't satisfied with Enlightenment essays and elegant salons. She wanted borders redrawn, flags raised, and Russia feared. From her first years as Empress, she set her sights south. The Ottoman Empire, weakened and fractured, was ripe for the taking. Through 2 brutal wars, Catherine's armies surged forward, seizing Crimea and securing Russia's long-coveted access to the Black Sea. She didn't just fight, she reshaped Europe's map with Crimea. With warm water ports now under her control, Russia could trade year-round and project naval power into the Mediterranean. It was a geopolitical checkmate, and Europe took notice. Then came Poland. The once proud Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was unstable and fractured. Catherine, alongside Prussia and Austria, saw opportunity. Over 3 partitions, they divided the country like scavengers over a carcass. With Prussia and Austria, she carved up Poland like a feast. By the end, Poland was erased from the map entirely, a nation devoured by empires. It was ruthless, strategic, and shockingly efficient. Catherine didn't just conquer, she colonized. She invited Germans, Greeks, and others to settle the newly gained lands, promising religious freedom and fertile fields. Cities like Odessa were born from her ambitions, dotting the empire like fresh trophies. New cities rose, settlers came. She built an empire from scratch. Her rule expanded Russia's territory by over 200,000 square miles, one of the largest gains under any czar. She envisioned Russia not just as a cold, backward monarchy, but as a modern powerhouse, seated confidently at the table of European great powers. Catherine didn't just rule, she made Russia a continental force. And yet, for all her success, her conquests came at a cost. Displaced peoples, rising nationalist tensions, and a growing empire that would one day strain under its own weight. History remembers her as both visionary and imperialist, an empress who built magnificently, but not always mercifully. But empires are made not just in battlefields and treaties, they're shaped in bedrooms, alliances, and whispered scandals. Catherine's next challenge wasn't on the map. It was in her court, and in her own reputation. Next, the woman behind the crown, Catherine's controversial loves and lasting myths. Catherine the Great rewrote more than Russia's borders. She rewrote the rules for women in power, and nowhere was that more evident than in her love life. Yes, she had lovers. Many. Some were handsome soldiers, others charming intellectuals, and almost all were younger than her. But to reduce them to mere flings is to miss the strategy behind the seduction. Her lovers weren't just flings. They were allies with titles. Catherine chose her companions with the precision of a chess master. They weren't just warm bodies, they were confidants, advisors, and sometimes tools. Their presence kept rivals close and loyalty closer. But among them, one stood above the rest: Grigory Potemkin. Their romance was fierce, intelligent, and enduring, even after the passion cooled. Some believe they married in secret. Whether or not that's true, Potemkin became her closest partner in governance, commanding armies and shaping policy alongside her. Potemkin wasn't just her lover, he was her co-ruler in all but name. Their connection went beyond politics or pleasure. He helped expand the empire, most notably in Crimea, and continued to advise her even after their romance faded. Of course, powerful women attract powerful rumors. Catherine's many enemies, foreign and domestic, sought to shame her with scandal. They mocked her lovers, questioned her morals, and fabricated the most absurd gossip. The ugliest myth, a false and grotesque tale involving a horse, an outright lie, born of misogyny and political envy. Europe gossiped, but Catherine didn't care. She ruled the narrative. What truly unsettled her critics wasn't promiscuity, it was her power. In a world where kings flaunted mistresses by the dozen, Catherine's independence was unforgivable. She refused to be ashamed. Love was her choice, not her weakness. She ruled with both. She separated governance from her personal life, never letting affairs of the heart cloud affairs of the state. If anything, her relationships enhanced her political agility, building alliances, securing loyalty, and keeping her isolated in name only. Catherine embraced pleasure as part of life, not a betrayal of duty, but a celebration of freedom. And in doing so, she became a symbol of unapologetic agency in a world that preferred women silent, obedient, and invisible. But passion and politics couldn't shield her from unrest forever. As she expanded her empire and tightened her grip, the cracks in society began to widen. Next, the peasant who claimed to be her dead husband and led Russia's greatest rebellion. Catherine's empire, vast and gleaming on the surface, was always built on unstable ground. Beneath the palaces and reforms simmered centuries of suffering, especially among the serfs, who bore the weight of imperial ambition without reward. It only took a spark to ignite the fury. That spark was a man named Emelyan Pugachev, a former Don Cossack. Rough and charismatic, Pugachev made an outrageous claim. He was Peter III, Catherine's supposedly dead husband, risen to reclaim his throne. To the desperate serfs, it didn't matter if it was true. What mattered was the promise he offered. Pugachev promised freedom, and the serfs saw hope in his lies. In villages starved by taxes and crushed by noble landlords, his words sounded like salvation. Thousands joined his cause, peasants, Cossacks, even some disgruntled soldiers. Town after town fell. Noble estates burned. Officials were slaughtered. The empire shook. Her own people turned against her. For the first time since her coup, Catherine's throne felt unsteady. The rebellion wasn't just a rural riot. It was a civil war. And it exposed just how fragile her Enlightenment dream really was. The same peasants whose lives she had hoped to uplift were now raising pitchforks and torches against her. Catherine didn't hesitate. She abandoned the pen and picked up the sword. She dispatched generals, rallied loyal Cossacks, and sent her armies to crush the rebellion with overwhelming force. No mercy was shown. Cities were retaken. Pugachev was captured in a cage and paraded through Moscow like a trophy. She sent armies, caged Pugachev, and silenced the revolt. In 1775, he was executed, beheaded and quartered. His limbs were nailed to posts as a warning. The rebellion was over, but its scars ran deep. The aftermath changed Catherine. The idealistic empress who had once quoted Voltaire and Diderot now saw reform as a dangerous luxury. If freedom inspired rebellion, then order must come first. Voltaire faded. Control took over. Reform became a whisper. She doubled down on autocracy, tightened control over the provinces, and gave nobles even more power over their serfs. The dream of a more equal Russia was replaced with the reality of survival. Catherine learned a hard truth. Enlightenment ideas were easy to praise from the safety of salons. Governing a restless, fractured empire required more than philosophy. It required force. Yet, even in this turn toward repression, her legacy continued to grow. She remained unshaken on the throne, her empire larger than ever. But the rebellion had reminded her, and the world, that no crown sits easily, not even on the head of the most powerful woman in Europe. Next, in her final years, Catherine looks back on a reign like no other, and leaves a legacy that would outlive even her harshest critics. By the time Catherine the Great died in 1796, she had ruled Russia for 34 years, longer than any woman in its history. And in that time, she didn't just hold the throne, she reshaped the empire beneath it. She expanded Russia by 200,000 miles and gave it art and schools. Crimea was hers. Most of Poland, erased from the map, now belonged to Russia. She built cities where there had been forests, invited settlers from Europe, and turned the Hermitage into one of the world's greatest museums. Under her rule, Russia became more than a distant giant. It became a cultural force. But Catherine's legacy is not one of simple triumph. It's one of dazzling contradictions. She wrote letters to Voltaire, praised the Enlightenment, and banned torture. Yet she tightened the chains of serfdom, handing the nobility more power over the peasants than ever before. She preached equality, but chained serfs to keep nobles loyal. She believed in reason, yet ruled through absolute power. She dreamed of modernity but secured it with autocracy. Her reign is a paradox, a golden age built on the backs of the oppressed. Behind the splendor of her court and the shine of her reforms, Catherine was still a woman alone in power. She trusted few, always wary of betrayal, the price of taking a throne by coup. Her son Paul, the heir she distrusted and kept at a distance, loomed over her later years. She ruled millions but trusted few, haunted by her son's shadow. There were whispers she planned to bypass Paul and name her grandson Alexander as her successor. But before she could act, death came quietly in her palace. Not in exile, not by sword, but in her bed, an empress to the end. Catherine left behind a Russia that was bigger, richer, more connected to Europe, and more complex. Her legacy would inspire monarchs and revolutionaries alike. She proved a woman could rule like a man, or better. She proved ambition, intelligence, and charm could rewrite fate. Catherine didn't just reign. She became a myth, the great. Her name echoed across continents and centuries, but so did the questions. Was she a liberator or a tyrant? A reformer or a reactionary? Can anyone be both? And with her death, the world turned a page in history, but not into peace. Storms were brewing in Europe, revolutions, terrors, red flags on the horizon, which brings us to another woman of contradictions, another queen wrapped in mystery, blood, and legacy. Next, the Red Queen. Who was she? A tyrant? A martyr? A monster? Let's find out. Deep in the tangled green heart of the Chiapas jungle, beneath centuries of roots and rain, something ancient waited. Palenque, once a thriving Maya city, had long since fallen silent. But in 1994, that silence was shattered by the sound of stone giving way beneath human hands. In Chiapas's jungle, a hidden chamber waited for centuries. Archaeologists had long studied the Temple 13 complex, just steps from the famous tomb of King Pakal the Great. But this new chamber, sealed for over 1,000 years, offered something completely unexpected. As the team cautiously chipped away the last layer of limestone, stale air and red dust spilled into the light. They had found a tomb, but not just any tomb. They opened the sarcophagus and red dust rose like a ghost. Inside was a stone coffin, sealed tight. As the lid was pried open, crimson powder, cinnabar, a mineral made of mercury, billowed up in a cloud, staining everything. At its heart lay a skeleton draped in ceremonial finery. She had been someone of immense importance. She wore a jade mask, surrounded by treasures fit for a queen. The woman was adorned with a brilliant jade mask that had once covered her face, symbol of power and rebirth. Jade beads, pearls, bone needles, and obsidian blades surrounded her. And everywhere, that brilliant red powder. This wasn't a typical burial. It was a royal one. But there was one glaring problem. Her name was missing. No inscriptions, no glyphs on the walls, no stele. Just a woman, buried in splendor, with no identity. No name, no glyphs, just a mystery in scarlet. The Red Queen. That's what they called her. The Red Queen. A nameless monarch, possibly consort to Pakal, perhaps his mother, or even a ruler in her own right. Her story had been buried, literally, and only fragments remained. Yet the way she was laid to rest told its own tale. The cinnabar used in elite Maya burials wasn't just a color. It was a symbol, a transformation, a shield, a curse. It preserved and poisoned at once. And here, in this chamber of silence and crimson, the ancient world spoke without words. Who was she? Why was she buried so close to Pakal? Why was she denied a name? The mystery had only just begun. Next, we dive into the significance of cinnabar, the toxic beauty that bathed the Red Queen in scarlet dust, and what it meant to the Maya. The tomb of the Red Queen was more than a burial site. It was a ceremonial passage, crafted with intention, sacrifice, and belief. Every object, every color, every grain of dust whispered the sacred language of the Maya cosmos. And at the heart of that language was cinnabar. Cinnabar wasn't just red. It was life, sacrifice, a bridge to the gods. To the Maya, red was no ordinary color. It was chulel, the life force, the blood that fed the gods. Cinnabar, a vivid red mercury sulfide powder, was dangerous to breathe or touch. But in Maya hands, it became divine. It coated the queen's bones, her mask, her offerings, bathing her in the color of death and the promise of rebirth. She was not the only one. Only Pakal shared her crimson honor, hinting at her royal status. King Pakal the Great, buried just meters away, had also been covered in cinnabar. His tomb, the most celebrated in Maya archaeology, echoed the same ritual. This parallel spoke volumes. The Red Queen, though nameless, had been given the same spiritual treatment as the city's greatest ruler. She wasn't just someone's wife. She was power in her own right. The offerings confirmed it. Her tomb was a ritual, with tools for her journey to the underworld. Jaguar skin fragments, symbol of kingship and the night sun. Bone needles, likely used in bloodletting rituals to nourish the gods. Jade figurines, tokens of life, eternity, and status. Each item placed beside her was part of a cosmic roadmap, guiding her soul through Xibalba, the Maya underworld. These weren't decorations, they were instructions. She would need strength to face the 9 levels of Xibalba, each filled with trials and trickster gods. But with her sacred mask, blood-red cloak of cinnabar, and ritual offerings, she was prepared. She wasn't buried to rest, she was sent to become divine. In Maya belief, rulers didn't simply die. They ascended. The tomb wasn't an end, but a chrysalis, a space where a human body could be transfigured into something holy. The Red Queen, in death, was not forgotten by accident, but perhaps transformed into something meant to transcend names. Her story is not one of finality. It's one of mystery, ritual, and silent reverence, and it continues through the objects she left behind. Next, we step closer to those offerings, the jaguar skins, the jade, the sharpened bone. What did they mean? And what secrets might they still reveal about a queen who died, not to sleep, but to rise? In the dim, dust-choked silence of her tomb, the Red Queen lay surrounded not by ornaments, but by symbols, each one humming with spiritual intent. To a modern eye, they might seem like decorations or treasures. But to the Maya, these offerings were far more. They were tools, provisions, and spells, each one essential for the long journey through death. Jade wasn't jewelry, it was the breath of gods, eternal and sacred. Jade held a power that went beyond wealth. It represented life force, fertility, and immortality. Around the Red Queen's neck and limbs were strands of jade beads, carefully arranged. A carved jade mask covered her face, meant not to preserve her identity, but to transform it. Jade allowed the soul to breathe in the afterlife. It wasn't just beautiful, it was vital. And she didn't go alone. Laid gently beside her were tools, ritual implements of blood and spirit. Needles and blades weren't tools, they were keys to the afterlife. Bone needles, obsidian blades, objects used for auto-sacrifice, the ritual bleeding that sustained the gods. In life, she would have offered her own blood in devotion. In death, these tools allowed her to continue that sacred duty. Blood was currency, and even beyond the grave, she was expected to give. Nearby, ceramic vessels lay sealed, undisturbed for centuries. Sealed pots held food for her soul's journey through Xibalba's trials. The underworld Xibalba was no resting place. It was a labyrinth of gods and demons, hunger and illusion. These vessels likely contained maize, cacao, or tamales, spiritual nourishment for the Red Queen's soul as she navigated its 9 dark levels. Without food, her spirit could weaken, falter, or become lost forever. Every item was placed with purpose. Nothing was accidental. Her tomb wasn't a grave, it was a gateway to eternity. The chamber itself was a cosmic map, north, south, east, and west. Each direction symbolized an element of the universe. Red dust for blood, jade for breath, offerings for survival. The Red Queen wasn't simply being laid to rest, she was being equipped for transcendence. This wasn't a story of death, it was a ritual of rebirth. And yet, despite the care and reverence given to her journey, one question lingers. Who was she? Her tomb bears no name, no glyph, no clear lineage. But the magnitude of her burial hints at power, at intimacy with royalty. Some archaeologists believe she may have been Zakbu Ajau, the wife of Pakal the Great. If true, this would make her not just a queen, but a mother of kings, a bridge between dynasties. Next, we explore the evidence, bones, carvings, and silence. Could she truly have been the consort of Pakal? Or does her identity remain forever veiled in red? Deep beneath the Temple of the Inscriptions in Palanque, a crimson-stained tomb lay hidden for over a millennium. When archaeologists opened it in 1994, they found a woman buried in splendor. Jade mask, bone needles, scarlet dust. But not a single glyph bore her name. And so, she became known simply as the Red Queen. Was she Zakbu, Pal's queen, buried beside him in death? The most compelling theory links her to Zakbu Ajau, also known as Zakbu, a noblewoman from a distant city who became the wife of Pakal the Great, Palanque's most powerful ruler. The Red Queen's tomb was mere meters from Pakal's, and her burial mirrored his in grandeur and ritual. It seems deliberate, too deliberate to be a coincidence. But science complicated the story. No DNA link, but marriage doesn't need blood, only power. Tests comparing her remains with Pakal's revealed no biological relationship, ruling her out as his mother or sister. But if she were his wife, that wouldn't matter. In Maya culture, marriage was not about genetics. It was about alliances, status, and divine legitimacy. If she was Zakbu Ajau, she may have ruled as queen consort, her power drawn not from blood but from ceremony. Still, the mystery refuses to yield. Some scholars propose other identities. Sakuk, another royal woman tied to dynastic rituals. A high priestess, elevated by her spiritual role rather than her birth. Or even a dynastic ancestor, buried to sanctify a lineage. But none of these can be proven. And then there's the silence. No name carved. Perhaps her power was meant to live in ritual, not words. Unlike most elite Maya tombs, hers contains no identifying glyphs, no titles, no lineage markers. This absence may not be an oversight, but a choice. In Maya cosmology, ritual mattered more than biography. Perhaps her identity was meant to be absorbed into myth, her individuality surrendered to the divine. She became a symbol, not a person. And yet, in that silence, something speaks. Nameless but not voiceless, she ruled in scarlet silence. Her jade eyes still stare through time. Her offerings whisper stories of devotion, sacrifice, and power. The Red Queen reminds us that Maya women were not passive figures in the shadows of kings. They were political actors, spiritual leaders, and dynastic linchpins, even if history chose not to name them. We may never know her true name, but her legacy survives, embedded in stone, ritual, and scarlet dust. Now we leave the temples of Palenque behind and cross time and space to 20th century Mexico, where another woman, also adorned in color and defiance, challenged conventions, redefined identity, and painted herself into history. Frida Kahlo. In a house painted the color of the sky, surrounded by bright gardens and louder dreams, a girl named Frida Kahlo was born in 1907. The Casa Azul, in the quiet neighborhood of Coyoacán, Mexico City, would become her sanctuary, her canvas, and her legend. In the vibrant Casa Azul, Frida was born to color and contradiction. Frida's life began with a fusion of worlds. Her father, Guillermo, was a German-Hungarian photographer, her mother, Matilde, a devout Catholic of indigenous and Spanish descent. Frida grew up at the crossroads of cultures, classes, and revolutions, and the tension between them would shape her art, her politics, and her sense of self. At 6 years old, polio swept into her life. It left her right leg thinner, her gait uneven, and subjected her to years of cruel teasing. But Frida responded not with self-pity, but defiance. Polio stole her leg's strength at 6, but never her fire. She learned to box, ride horses, and outwit her bullies with sharp words and sharper will. Her father, often bedridden himself with epilepsy, became her closest ally, encouraging her to read, observe, and express herself. He also gave her something more enduring, his camera and his eye for composition. At 15, Frida joined the National Preparatory School, one of Mexico's most prestigious institutions, a rare place for girls in that era. There, she stood out, not just for her intelligence, but for her rebellious spirit and ambition. At 15, she didn't dream of marriage. She wanted to heal the world. Frida planned to become a doctor, to study anatomy, and cure the suffering she saw around her. She fell in with a group of student intellectuals, debated Marx and poetry, and began to shape her voice. But fate had other plans. In September 1925, while riding home with her boyfriend on a crowded wooden bus, tragedy struck. A streetcar collided with the bus, splintering it like matchsticks. A metal handrail pierced Frida's pelvis, fracturing her spine, breaking ribs, collarbone, and legs. She was only 18. A streetcar crushed her body, but in the wreckage, an artist was born. For months, Frida was immobilized in a full-body cast, staring at the ceiling, screaming in pain. But her parents rigged a mirror above her bed and gave her brushes, canvas, and a wooden easel. Unable to move, she began to paint what she saw. Herself. In a body cast, staring at her reflection, Frida began to paint her truth. These early self-portraits weren't vain. They were survival. She painted to understand the pain, to regain control, and to assert her identity in a world that had tried to erase her body. What began as therapy soon became revolution. Her gaze was unflinching, her colors bold, her symbols visceral. Frida's paintings would grow louder, stranger, and more political. But at the core, it all began in silence. A girl, a mirror, a brush, and a broken body determined not to vanish.